My daughter-in-law walked through my living room with that arrogant calm that only someone who has already decided they own what does not belong to them possesses. She smiled softly, a rehearsed smile, and said, "Your house is beautiful. My parents will take the top floor. My sister and her kids will take the bottom one. It is your duty to welcome them." My son was by her side in silence, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he were a guest, and not the boy I raised under this very roof. For an instant everything hung in suspension. I heard the ticking of the clock behind me, the hum of the refrigerator, and the dry thud of my own heart. They thought they had me cornered, an aging widower with nowhere to go, with no one to fight for me, with no one to defend these walls full of memories of the woman I loved. They believed I would lower my head, say yes, and erase myself from my own life. Instead of that, I stood up slowly, letting the chair legs scrape against the wood. I saw how both of them tensed. I smiled with a measured calm that for the first time made my daughter-in-law's confidence waver, and I pronounced a single sentence, "One," and the room fell silent. They did not know that by trying to appropriate my home, they awakened something in me, something sharper than grief and older than fear. And if whoever is listening stays with me, you will see the betrayal, the humiliation, the secrets they never imagined, and a revenge that will fall with more force than my daughter-in-law can conceive. This story does not end how they think. My name is Robert Miller. I am 68 years old, and I am a retired civil engineer. I spent 4 decades building bridges and highways across 3 states. I built things made to last, concrete and steel destined to remain when I was no longer there. And I never imagined that the hardest thing I would have to build would be a case against my own daughter-in-law. The Sunday when it all started was unusually hot for late October. I had just returned from visiting Helen's grave, where I spent an hour clearing weeds around the headstone and telling her about the changing colors of the leaves she liked so much. 8 months have passed since the funeral, and I still talk to her every week as if she could answer me. The drive back usually brings me peace, that silent transit from pain to the daily rhythm. But when I turned onto our street that afternoon, peace was the last thing waiting for me. There were 3 cars in my driveway. I recognized David's sedan. The others no. A silver SUV and a luxury black vehicle that screamed money spent to impress. My pulse raced as I parked behind them. Through the living room window, I saw shadows moving from one side to another as if the place belonged to them. I found them in the kitchen. Not only David and Linda, but her entire family. Victor Sanders with his golf club tan and his superior air. Martha with her evaluating gaze cataloging every surface. And Sarah, Linda's younger sister, already opening cupboards as if taking inventory. They walked through my house, touching Helen's things and commenting on the layout, like buyers at an open house. "Robert," Linda saw me first, her smile wide and warm, the kind that does not reach the eyes. "We did not expect you back so soon. Sit down. We have wonderful news." I did not sit. I stayed in the doorway of my own kitchen, watching strangers claim a territory that was not theirs. "Your house is beautiful, Robert," she continued, encompassing with a gesture the space Helen decorated with 35 years of love. My parents were looking at places nearby. But why bother if there is so much space here? Mom and Dad will take the bedroom upstairs, the one with the nice bath. Sarah can use the guest room. You will not even notice they are here. The words remained floating like a declaration of war wrapped in silk. I looked at my son David shrinking behind his wife's shoulders, with his eyes fixed on the floor. He did not look at me. He could not look at me. And in that instant I saw the boy who used to follow me to construction sites, asking endless questions about load-bearing walls and foundations. That boy, curious about foundations, had turned into a man incapable of sustaining his father's gaze, while his wife dismantled everything we had built. Then Martha Sanders took a step forward with a voice soaked in rehearsed concern and said, "We are only thinking of you, Robert. A man of your age alone in such a big house is not safe. We are family, and family takes care of each other. I observed how Linda exchanged a quick, complicit glance with her mother. Precise, as if everything was choreographed, in their gestures, in their words, in how they distributed themselves around the room. That was not a spontaneous visit. It was a planned occupation while I talked to my dead wife about autumn leaves. And then I remembered 3 months before Helen died, when the cancer was already stealing her strength. She squeezed my hand with surprising energy and told me, "Robert, listen to me. If something happens to me, look for the blue envelope in my jewelry box. Promise me you will not open it unless you truly need it." I promised, confused and devastated, attributing her urgency to the medication or the fear of leaving me alone. And I forgot that envelope until this instant, standing in my kitchen surrounded by vultures with familiar smiles. I looked at them one by one. Victor's arrogance, Martha's calculation, Sarah's sense of entitlement, Linda's barely disguised triumph, and David, my son, still with his gaze fixed on the floor. Then I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of an engineer who just detected a structural failure no one else saw. That smile froze Linda's, because what I did not say, what I was already planning, would end up destroying everything she had raised. They moved in 48 hours later as if my silence had been an invitation. That Sunday I only said one sentence: "This is my house, and I decide who lives in it." But Linda laughed and patted my arm like a confused child who does not understand how the world works. By Tuesday morning, suitcases filled the hallway, and the Sanders family had taken every free inch of the space Helen and I built together. Martha started with the kitchen. I went down and found her emptying the cupboards, separating the plates Helen had organized with care into piles of what she considered valuable or disposable. These old things must go, she announced, lifting the ceramic bowl Helen's mother gave us at the wedding. You cannot keep using something so outdated. Before I could respond, the bowl was already in a trash bag next to a dozen irreplaceable memories. I watched how she threw away 40 years of accumulated love as if it were garage sale junk, and I said nothing. But my engineer mind, trained to document every detail, started cataloging every offense with cold precision. Sarah was worse in her own way. She inherited her mother's sense of entitlement without the mask of courtesy. One morning she told Linda without lowering her voice, "Although I was in the next room, at his age most are grateful that someone still visits them. He should thank us for taking care of him instead of looking at us as if we were intruders." They laughed, and the laugh bounced through the house Helen filled with warmth for 35 years. Victor treated me like a delinquent tenant. He took over my armchair, changed the channels to his liking, and left his golf magazines thrown on the table where Helen's books used to rest. When I asked him to take his feet off the footrest she had upholstered with her own hands, he looked at me with a mix of pity and contempt and said, "Relax, Robert. We are family now. What is yours is ours." I started to understand the shape of their plan on the third day. I went up to look for a sweater and stopped in front of the guest room, hearing Linda's voice through the cracked door. She was speaking on the phone with the low and urgent tone of someone doing business they do not want others to hear. "How soon can we put a property up for sale if the owner is no longer capable of managing it?" A pause. "Yes, I understand there is a process. But what if we had documentation, medical evaluations, that type of thing?" Another pause. "Perfect. I will be in touch soon." My blood froze. That was not about family union, nor taking care of a lonely widower. It was a pure and simple acquisition. They planned to take my house, the house I built with Helen, where we raised our son, where every room held memories they were already putting in trash bags. I heard footsteps in the hall and pressed myself against the wall with my heart racing. Martha's voice arrived from the master bedroom where she was ordering Helen's closet without permission. "It is exactly what we did with Grandma's house. Remember? The key is patience. Let them get comfortable. Let them depend on you. And the door closed, cutting off the rest. But I had heard enough. That afternoon the doorbell rang, a small relief in the form of Grace Miller, the next-door neighbor. She appeared on the porch with a pie in her hands, her silver hair tied back with neatness and sharp eyes, despite her 73 years. Grace had lived next to us for 15 years, and she had been close to Helen in ways I never fully understood. They spent countless afternoons together, drinking tea and talking about those things wives share when husbands are not around. I brought you something, Grace said, handing me the apple pie with cinnamon. Your wife's recipe. Martha appeared almost immediately behind me. Her radar for visitors seemed always on. What a nice detail. You must be one of the neighbors. I am Martha Sanders, Linda's mom. We are staying here to help Robert in this difficult moment. Grace's expression tensed barely. A flash I did not know how to read crossed her face. She looked past Martha directly at me. Your wife taught me this recipe when we were girls, she said in a low voice. I thought you would like something familiar. The phrase sounded strange to me. When we were girls. Grace and Helen had met as adults, or so I thought. I wanted to ask what she referred to, but Martha was already escorting her toward the door with aggressive courtesy, thanking her for the pie and making it clear that more visits were not necessary. I will be back soon, Grace said firmly, locking her eyes on mine with an intensity that seemed like a message. There are things we must talk about, Robert. Things Helen wanted you to know. That night when the Sanders retired to the spaces they had already claimed and the house fell silent, I took Helen's jewelry box from the closet. My hands shook as I opened the lid. I moved aside her pearls and our wedding rings until I found the blue envelope hidden under the velvet lining. It was heavier than I expected, thick with invisible papers behind the opaque material. 8 months of grief had not prepared me for that moment. I had spent that time learning to sleep alone, to cook for one, to exist in a world without Helen's laughter, without her touch or her wise calm. I thought I knew every secret of our marriage, every shared dream, but that envelope told me otherwise. I opened it, expecting memories, and I found a battle plan, and the proof that my wife had seen this war coming years before it arrived. The first thing I pulled out was a handwritten letter. Helen's elegant handwriting filled 3 pages of ivory paper. The date at the top cut my breath. She had written it 14 months before dying, much before the diagnosis, much before knowing her time was running out. It was not the desperate warning of a dying woman. It was the meticulous preparation of someone who saw danger and refused to leave me defenseless. My dear Robert, the letter began, and I could hear her voice in every word, serene and firm as always. If you are reading this, it means someone is trying to keep what we built. I prayed you never had to open this envelope. But if you did, the moment I feared has arrived, and you must act quickly. I have watched Linda for years. I have seen how she looks at our house when she thinks no one sees her. Not with love, but with calculation. I have seen how she isolates David from us, how she places herself between our son and his family. I have seen how she treats you when she thinks I am not looking. The small cruelties disguised as jokes, the disdain wrapped in false concern, the words blurred with my tears. For years of family dinners and parties, Helen had observed and worried while I remained blind. She carried that weight alone, protecting me from truths that would have caused conflict, and guarding David from accusations that would have destroyed his marriage. She kept silent for love, but she also prepared for war. I kept silent to protect our son's marriage. The letter continued. I told myself maybe I was wrong, that maybe Linda would become the wife David deserved. But I will not allow my silence to become your prison. If you read this, my worst fears have been confirmed, and you need to know you are not defenseless. The letter instructed me to contact Paul Harrison immediately. The name seemed familiar. He had been a colleague of Helen at the firm before retiring, a state prosecutor she always spoke of with respect. I modified our family trust 18 months ago, she wrote. I added protection clauses that Paul will explain in detail. He has copies of everything and knows what to do. Trust him fully. But that was not all. Helen had gathered evidence, built a file like the lawyer she was. There is a camera in the antique kitchen clock, she explained. I installed it 3 years ago when I started to suspect Linda's intentions. The recordings upload to a cloud account Paul can access. There's also a file in our safety deposit box at the First National Bank. Photographs, documents, things I gathered proving Linda is not who she appears to be. My hands trembled. I put down the letter and covered my eyes, trying to calm myself. The woman I loved for 35 years, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had conducted a secret investigation under the same roof where we shared meals, anniversaries, and grew old together. I felt pain for her loneliness, gratitude for having thought to protect me, and guilt for not noticing anything. How many nights she must have spent awake planning a future she would not see, building defenses for a husband who did not even know a threat existed. I took the letter again, and my eyes stopped on a paragraph I had already read 3 times. They will try to declare you incompetent. They will try to take the house. They will try to erase everything we built together. I could almost hear Martha's voice that very morning, talking about what they did to someone's grandmother. Helen had anticipated their tactics with chilling precision. Do not allow them anything, my love. I already gave you the tools. Now use them. Under the letter were other documents, legal papers I would need Paul to explain, bank statements, a list of names and numbers. At the very bottom, an old photograph that left me breathless. 2 young women smiled at the camera arm in arm, in front of a house I did not recognize. One was undoubtedly Helen in her 20s, with hair darker than I remembered and a luminous smile of youth. The other looked disturbingly like Grace Miller, the same sharp gaze, the same firmness in the jaw, although decades younger than the neighbor I knew. I turned the photo over, and on the back, with faded ink that was once blue, someone had written, Sisters, 1978. I stared at those 2 words until they stopped making sense. Sisters? Helen never mentioned having a sister in 35 years of marriage. In countless chats about family childhood and past, she never spoke of any sibling. Grace had lived next door for 15 years, and I never suspected a bond beyond friendship. But there was the proof in Helen's handwriting hidden in the same envelope containing her plans. I put the photograph aside, my mind too saturated to process another revelation. The Sanders family was planning to take my house. My wife had spent years preparing my defense. Apparently the neighbor who brought me a pie that same day was not who she appeared to be. One crisis at a time. The mystery of the sister would have to wait. I reread Helen's last instructions. Call Paul first thing in the morning. Tell him the blue envelope is open. He will know what it means. Helen had fought a war I knew nothing about. According to her letter, the most lethal weapon awaited me in Paul Harrison's office. Paul Harrison's office occupied the corner of a downtown building that had stood since before I was born. The brass plate on the door was polished without ostentation, and the waiting room had leather armchairs that spoke of old money and careful discretion. I called first thing as Helen indicated, and the receptionist put me through immediately. Mr. Miller? Paul said with a voice loaded with expectation. I have been waiting for this call. Can you come today? He received me personally, a man of a little over 60, attentive eyes, silver hair, and a handshake that transmitted confidence and empathy. I remembered him from Helen's retirement party years ago, a discreet presence who spoke with respect about her work. Now I understood why she trusted him with secrets she never shared with me. Helen updated her will and trust with me, Paul said when we were in his private office with the door closed to the world. She came 18 months before passing, long before the diagnosis. She was worried, Robert. She did not want to alarm you, but she did not want to leave you vulnerable. He opened a drawer and took out a thick manila folder with a label written in capital letters. Miller Protection File. It had at least 2 inches of documents, photographs, and what looked like professional reports. He slid it toward me. Everything Helen gathered is here. She wanted you to understand the scope of what you face and the scope of your defenses. I opened the folder with trembling hands. The first document was a report from a private investigator with official letterhead and case number. My eyes fixed on the date, 6 months before Helen died. When she was still strong and keeping this secret, she had hired someone to follow Linda, document her movements, and uncover truths that would have destroyed the family if they came to light. The report was devastating. Over 3 months, the investigator recorded 4 meetings between Linda and a divorce lawyer. Also 2 encounters with a real estate appraiser, one of them in my house while Helen and I were supposedly out. But the most crushing were the photographs that turned my stomach. Linda entering a hotel with a man who was clearly not my son. Time stamps showing stays of hours. The same hotel repeating in 3 different weeks. She was planning to divorce David, Paul said in a low voice while I assimilated the blow. The conclusion was clear. Linda was preparing to claim part of the family assets while maintaining an affair. She wanted the money without the marriage. I closed the folder, unable to see more images of my daughter-in-law's betrayal. "Does David know?" I asked. "Helen never told him," Paul answered. "She told no one but me." He leaned in with seriousness. She wanted to give David the chance to see the truth for himself. She did not want to destroy her son's marriage unless it was absolutely necessary. But she left everything ready in case that moment arrived. Then he explained the legal architecture Helen had built. The family trust contained a protection clause for duress that would activate if I could demonstrate I was being pressured or stripped of assets. Upon proving I had been coerced or exploited by relatives, upon activation of the clause, all assets would automatically pass to a protective entity Linda could never access regardless of her relationship with David. The clause required documented proof, Paul explained. Threats, financial manipulation, elder abuse, any of those situations sufficed. Helen built this like a fortress, Robert. She anticipated exactly what Linda might try. And now your task is to gather the evidence that activates these protections. There was more. Paul took a single check from a separate envelope. The paper was slightly yellowed by time. It was for $15,000, drawn against Helen's personal account, dated 3 years ago. The signature on the front was Helen's, or rather a careful imitation of her signature. And on the back someone had endorsed it with handwriting I did not recognize. Helen discovered this about 6 months after it was cashed, Paul said. She could have reported it immediately. Forgery is a felony, and this would have been enough to get Linda arrested. But she did not. She kept the canceled check as proof. Why? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Because she loved David. Because she hoped Linda would change. That she would become the wife her son deserved. Because she did not want to be the one to destroy that marriage. Paul's voice softened. She was protecting everyone. You, David, even Linda in a way. She gave her every chance to be a better person. But she also ensured that if she chose the other path, there would be consequences. I stayed in silence with the weight of Helen's preparations falling on me. She had spent years building a case, gathering proof, consulting lawyers, hiring investigators, all while smiling at family dinners and keeping the peace for the good of our son. The sacrifice overwhelmed me. The love behind it broke my heart. "What do I do now?" I asked finally. Paul closed the folder and pushed it toward me. "You go home. You observe. You document everything they do and say. Helen mentioned a camera. She told me it would capture what you need. And when you have enough evidence, bring it to me and we activate the clause protecting everything you and Helen built together." I left Paul's office with a folder full of ammunition and my dead wife's faith in my ability to use them. But the next discovery would come from the most unexpected source, a camera Helen hid in plain sight. The antique clock had hung on the kitchen wall for 20 years. Helen's grandmother had brought it from England. A beautiful piece with a bronze face and hand-painted flowers, already softened by the patina of time. I walked past it thousands of times without giving it importance. Now I stood on a stool with my heart racing as I took it down carefully and checked the back. The camera was smaller than I imagined, a modern device no bigger than my thumb, installed professionally behind a false panel that integrated perfectly with the original wood. A tiny lens peeked through what I always thought was a decorative defect in the face. Helen had turned a family heirloom into a surveillance system without anyone suspecting. I took the laptop to the bedroom, locked the door to isolate myself from the Sanders who had taken over the rest of my house, and entered the credentials Helen had included in her letter. The cloud storage account contained almost 3 years of recordings, organized by date. Each file represented hours of activity in the kitchen captured without anyone knowing. My wife had been watching, recording, building proof for a battle she knew might come. The first recordings showed nothing out of the ordinary. Helen and I having breakfast, David and Linda coming for dinner on Sundays, the normal routine of family life. But as I advanced in the timeline, the tone changed. Linda's mask started to slip in moments when she thought only Helen saw her. The first clip that turned my stomach was dated 18 months ago. Linda was standing by the counter while Helen, visibly weaker from the start of her illness, sat at the table. "So you are going to die and leave us nothing useful, right?" Linda's voice dripped with contempt. "All this house, all these properties, if they get tied up in trusts and complications. You could make this easy, you know. You could sign everything now while you are still competent." Helen said nothing, hands crossed on her lap. Her face turned into a mask of patience. I found another clip from the same period, this time with Martha Sanders. She and Linda were sitting at the kitchen table while Helen slept upstairs. They spoke in low voices but were heard clearly. "When she is gone, the old man will be easy," Martha said with casual cruelty. "Men of that age fall apart without their wives. He will be confused, dependent. We move in to help, and in 6 months we will have power of attorney. In a year, the house." Linda nodded, taking notes on her phone. "Treating the destruction of my life like a project plan." I noted timestamps, saved key clips, and forced myself to keep watching, although bile rose in my throat. Each recording was another proof, another brick in the wall Helen had raised to protect me. I owed it to her to see it all, to know what she had seen, to understand what she had endured in silence. Then I found the recording from 8 months ago, only 3 weeks before Helen died. The kitchen was in shadows, lit barely by the stove light. Helen was alone at the table, her face consumed by the cancer that was stealing her from me, hands surrounding a cup of tea. For a long moment she looked at nothing, eyes red and lost. Then she started to cry. Silent sobs she tried to stifle with her hand, although she thought no one could hear her. "Forgive me, Robert," she whispered to the empty room. "Forgive me for not telling you, but I have to protect you in my own way. You would confront them and they would twist everything, and David would have to choose. I cannot force our son to choose between his father and his wife. So I have to do it alone. Please forgive me, my love. Please understand me." I closed the laptop and cried for 10 minutes. I sat on the edge of the bed where Helen had taken her last breath and cried harder than at her funeral. She had suffered alone to spare me pain. She had heard our daughter-in-law plan against us, endure threats and cruelty without saying a word, because she wanted to protect our family. That courage pierced my soul. It must have been the loneliness she felt when the tears finally stopped. Because something inside me changed. The grief was still there, but it transformed into something harder, colder, and much more focused. Helen had left me weapons, and now I was going to use them. That same night I called Paul Harrison and described what I had found. He walked me step by step through sending the most compromising clips securely to his encrypted server. His voice became graver with each file he received. This establishes a clear pattern of disrespect toward an elder and financial exploitation, he said when the transfer finished. Combined with the investigator's report and the forged check, we are building an ironclad case. Keep the camera on. Let them keep talking. They are building the file themselves. I followed his advice. The Sanders had no idea they were being recorded, nor that every cruel comment and every whispered plan was being registered and classified. I moved through the house like a ghost, docile and quiet, letting them believe they had already won. The camera had captured 3 years of cruelty, but what I found the next morning was much worse, a crime capable of sending Linda to prison. The recording was dated only 4 days prior, made while I was at a routine medical appointment. I had told them I would be out 2 hours, just enough for the checkup and the drive across town. I never imagined what Linda would do with that time. The kitchen camera partially showed the hallway to my office. I saw Linda look around the empty house before disappearing down there. 20 minutes later, she came out with her phone in hand, with an expression of satisfaction that made my skin crawl. I did not see what happened inside the office, but I clearly heard her call as she passed through the kitchen. "I have what we need," she said to whoever was on the other side. "His signature is easy to copy, just a few loops and a firm stroke down. We can have the letter of intent ready by next week. Once they declare him incompetent, no one is going to question it." She laughed at something they told her and added, "Don't worry. By the time someone notices, it will be too late to contest." My hands shook when I closed the laptop. Signature, letter of intent, declared incompetent. She did not just plan to corner me. She was willing to forge legal documents, to take everything Helen and I built together. I went immediately to my office, closed the door, and secured it for the first time since the Sanders invaded the house. The metal filing cabinet was against the wall, with documents supposed to be private and secure. I opened the drawer where I kept the important things, the deed, the policies, the taxes, and started searching for something that did not belong there. I found it almost at the bottom, between old utility contracts, as if it had always been there. A single sheet with professional formatting titled Letter of Intent regarding property transfer. The document stated that I, Robert Miller, desired to transfer ownership of my family home to my son David Miller and his wife, Linda Sanders Miller, upon determination of diminished mental capacity by an authorized physician. It was dated 3 weeks ago, and it bore my signature at the bottom. Only I had never seen that document, nor signed it, and that day I was in the hospital for a minor cardiac procedure, sedated and monitored, physically incapable of signing anything. The forgery was good, that had to be admitted. Whoever copied my signature studied it carefully, reproduced the loops and angles that make it unmistakable. But it was not perfect. The pressure was incorrect, too uniform, without the natural variation of a real signature, and the date was a fatal error any investigation would discover immediately. Then I noticed the second signature line at the foot of the page, under the heading Witness. Someone had signed David's name. My heart fell to the floor. My own son had participated in this fraud. Linda had convinced him to help forge documents to steal his father's house. I stared at David's signature, looking for answers in the ink, and little by little I saw that something did not add up. The letters were shaky, uneven. The A leaned too far to the right, and the last stroke faded weakly. Without the assurance that characterizes my son's handwriting, I went back mentally to 3 weeks ago, searching for something strange. David had mentioned in passing a rough night. That's what he called it. When Linda insisted they stay for dinner and kept filling his wine glass until he could barely get to the car. I assumed they just overdid it that night. Now I understood she got him drunk on purpose. Surely she put a pen in his hand and guided his signature while he was too impaired to know what he was signing. My son did not betray me. He was used just like me, just like Helen. Linda had turned David into an involuntary accomplice of federal fraud. I photographed everything, the forged document, the signatures, the drawer where they hid it, also the hospital papers proving I could not have signed anything that day. And I sent it all to Paul Harrison with my hand still trembling between rage and relief. His answer arrived in less than an hour. This is fraud against an elder Robert. Combined with the forged check from 3 years ago, we have a clear criminal pattern. This is no longer just a civil matter. We are talking about serious federal crimes. She could face prison. He paused, and I could hear him thinking. I advanced with the legal strategy, but one more piece was missing. I needed something direct from Linda's mouth. A verbal threat or admission we could present to the judge. Written proofs can be contested, but if she says the words and they are recorded, there is no defense. Can you get it? I thought of the camera still on in the kitchen recording every conversation. I thought of Linda's arrogance, of her certainty she had already won. Sooner or later she would make a mistake. People like her always did. I can get it, I answered. Press her if needed. Make her feel threatened. Those who think they have control usually say things they shouldn't when that control wobbles. I accepted and hung up, already plotting my next move. The trap was set, baited with patience and precision. I had proof of her abuse, recordings of her cruelty. But the next revelation would come from the woman next door and would change everything I thought I knew about my own family. Grace Miller's invitation arrived the next morning, in person. While the Sanders were distracted with a call about a furniture delay, she appeared at the back door with the same intensity in her gaze. I noticed the day she brought the pie. "Come to my house for tea this afternoon," she said in a low voice. "There are things we have to talk about, things Helen wanted you to know." She put a key in my hand. "Use the back gate. They do not need to see where you go." I sneaked out at 3, crossing through the garden gate that connected both properties. A gate Helen insisted on installing years ago without me understanding why she wanted such easy access to the neighbor's yard. Now that detail, like so many others, took on a new meaning. Grace's living room left me motionless. Photographs covered almost every surface, the mantelpiece, the side tables, the walls, and in one after another, I saw Helen. Teenage Helen with long dark hair. Helen in her 20s with graduation gown. Helen on our wedding day, radiant in white lace. I moved from one frame to another, with confusion growing at each image. Why did our neighbor have so many photos of my wife? "It is time you know the truth, Robert," Grace said from the kitchen door with the tea tray in her hands while observing me. She put down the tray and signaled me to sit. Then she settled in front of me with the care of someone carrying an enormous weight. "Helen was not just my friend," she said softly. "She was my younger sister. We were born Grace and Helen Patterson before marrying and taking different last names." At first the words did not fit. I heard them, understood their meanings separately, but could not reconcile them with 35 years of marriage to a woman I thought I knew completely. "That is impossible," I heard myself say. "Helen never mentioned having a sister. Not once." Grace winced with pain crossing her face. "We had a complicated family, Robert. Our parents were difficult people, and when I was 19, I married a man who promised to get me out of all that. It was a disaster. He was cruel and controlling. When I finally escaped, I changed my name and cut ties with everyone, including Helen. I was ashamed. I did not want anyone from my past to find me." She paused with her gaze lost in memories. "Helen found me anyway. 15 years ago, she tracked me with a private investigator, appeared at my door and said, 'I have looked for you for 20 years. Please do not disappear again.' She convinced me to buy the house next door. She wanted us to reconnect slowly. She was afraid to overwhelm you with her past. Afraid you would feel deceived if you discovered she had hidden something so important. But why hide it?" I asked, still trying to assimilate it. "Because she also felt shame." Grace answered with tenderness. "Shame that our family was so broken, for having lost her only sister for so long. She always wanted to tell you. She was always waiting for the right moment. And then she got sick, and suddenly there was no time for old secrets. The only thing that mattered was protecting you from what was coming." Grace leaned down and pulled a thick folder from under the coffee table, full of photos, handwritten notes, and printed documents. When Helen knew she was going to die, she made me promise I would watch over you. She told me everything about Linda, about the investigator, about the trust. She told me if Robert ever needs help, tell him I am still fighting for him. She opened the folder and turned the pages. I have been documenting Linda's behavior since the funeral. I photographed real estate agents visiting the house when they thought no one saw them. I recorded conversations from my window. In this state, one-party consent is enough, so it is all legal. I kept a journal with dates and incidents, everything I have observed. The proofs were meticulous. Photos with timestamps showing unknown cars in my driveway, transcripts where Linda spoke of getting the old man out of the way, notes detailing every cruelty Grace witnessed from her house. My sister asked me to be her eyes when she could no longer be here. Grace said with a broken voice, I have kept her promise, Robert. Every day since she left, I have been watching, waiting, gathering what you might need. I looked at that woman, Helen's sister, my sister-in-law, a stranger who at the same time was family, and I felt something open in my chest. Helen had raised a protection net around me, layer after layer, preparing for a battle she knew she would not live to fight. She had recruited her own sister, installed cameras, hired investigators, and modified trusts, all while smiling at family dinners, never letting me see her fear. She loved you more than I have seen anyone love anyone, Grace said in a low voice. She used to tell me Robert is my whole heart. I would burn the whole world to keep him safe. She prepared for this fight for years, Robert. She loved you that strongly. I crossed the space between us and took Grace's hand, the hand of my wife's sister, rough from years but warm with a shared purpose. Thank you, I told her, for keeping her promise, for being here. We will finish what she started, Grace answered firmly. Together. I had Helen's sister on my side and evidence arriving from all fronts. But when I planted a seed of doubt in David's mind, I did not imagine it would grow so fast, nor that it would bear such bitter fruit. The seed was small but intentional. I left the forged check, the one Helen had discovered 3 years prior, on my desk in the office, partially visible under a pile of utility bills, placed exactly where someone's sorting papers would note it, where the signature and amount would catch the eye before being able to look away. I knew Linda would not be the one to find it. Now she avoided the office, perhaps sensing her previous intrusion had been detected. But David still entered from time to use the printer, still retaining some link to the place where he did homework as a teenager. He found it a Thursday afternoon. I heard his steps stop in the hallway, the rustle of papers moving and then silence. When he came out 10 minutes later, his face was pale and his jaw tight. He walked straight to the kitchen where Linda was instructing her mother on how to arrange my pantry. I positioned myself in the living room close enough to hear without seeming obvious. What is this? David's voice was controlled but forced. I heard the check fall on the counter. A pause and then Linda's voice, smooth as silk. Oh, that. Your mom gave me that money as a gift years ago. When we were struggling with the down payment on our first apartment, she wanted to help with finances but did not want to embarrass you, making it look like charity. Mom never mentioned anything. Of course not, love. That was the point. She wanted to protect your pride. Linda's tone became condescending and sweet. You know how she was, always taking care of everyone from the shadows. The conversation ended there. Linda diverting attention to dinner plans, and Martha's opinion on spice organizers. But I had seen David's face as he passed the living room door, and what I saw gave me hope. He accepted the explanation on the surface, but underneath, something moved. A small engine of doubt that did not exist before. He did not look at me passing by, but his steps became slower, as if carrying a new and unexpected weight. That night, long after the Sanders retired to the territories, they had claimed I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. David was in the hall, still in work clothes despite being home for hours, with red eyes and hands buried in pockets like a teenager facing the principal. Dad, can we talk? I opened the door wider and let him pass. He did not sit in the chair I offered. He began to pace the small space between the bed and the window, incapable of being still, until finally he stopped with his back to me looking at the dark yard. Did Mom ever mention giving money to Linda? Large amounts. I mean, $15,000 or more. I chose every word carefully, knowing the next could push him toward the truth, or sink him further in denial. Your mother kept detailed records of every dollar she spent. Meticulous records. You know how she was. I have reviewed all her financial documents since she died, and never saw proof of gifts to Linda. Not of 15,000, nor of any amount. David's shoulders tensed. He did not turn or respond for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. The signature on that check looked weird. Not quite right. I noticed it too. Then he turned, and I saw in his eyes something I hadn't seen for years. The start of clarity. Painful and unwanted, but impossible to ignore. I need to think, he said, and left without adding anything else. In the following days, I watched my son transform. It was not something dramatic or sudden. David had spent too many years avoiding conflict for that. But the changes were unmistakable to a father who knew him. He started looking at Linda with other eyes, following her movements around the room, his expression changing when her stories did not quite add up. He noticed how she interrupted me, how she rolled her eyes when I spoke, how her voice hardened when she thought no one was listening. He began arriving earlier from work, inventing excuses to be in the same space as me. Sometimes he sat with me on the porch as evening fell, without speaking, sharing the silence like when he was a boy. The wall between us, the one Linda had built for years, was starting to crack. I could see him struggle, divided between the wife to whom he had committed his life and a truth that little by little became impossible to deny. One afternoon, while searching through Helen's things for documents, Grace had mentioned I found an old brochure hidden between the pages of a photo album. It advertised cabins on a lake shore in Vermont, the same area where Helen and I always talked about retiring. Wouldn't it be wonderful, she used to say, a little place by the water where we can watch the sunset every night. We never got there. Life always got in the way. Work, family, obligations, the 1,000 small delays that push dreams forward until suddenly there is no future left. In the margin of the brochure, with Helen's handwriting, were 2 words, our dream, someday. I put the brochure aside, with my chest tight with regret for the life we never got to live. Another victim of the relentless passage of time, another plan destined to remain unfulfilled forever. Then I could not know what that brochure actually meant, nor what Helen had done in silence to turn our someday into something real. That revelation would come later, when the battle was won. For now there were more urgent matters. David was waking up, slow but sure, and Linda could feel it. I saw her watching him with narrowed eyes, redoubling her efforts to keep him close and isolate him from me. She knew something had changed, even if she didn't understand what. David was starting to see cracks in the woman he married, but Linda had one last move prepared, one so cruel and calculated it would force everyone to take sides once and for all. The recording that changed everything was captured a Tuesday morning. While I pretended to sleep on the living room sofa, Linda had gotten careless, assuming a dozing old man could not be a threat. She was in the kitchen with the phone glued to her ear, speaking in that low and urgent tone of someone handling matters they do not want others to hear. The camera registered every word. Dr. Warren. Thank you for taking my call. I need documentation that my father-in-law shows signs of cognitive deterioration. She paused, listening. Yes, confusion, memory problems, inability to handle his own finances. He has worsened since my mother-in-law died. We are worried he might hurt himself or make decisions not in his best interest. Another pause. I understand what I am asking. My mother will compensate you adequately for your time and expertise. We just need an official evaluation in the file. I remained motionless on the sofa, with eyes closed and my heart pounding my ribs. She was scheduling a fraudulent medical evaluation, preparing the ground to declare me incompetent. With that document, she could request legal guardianship, take control of my money, sell my house, and put me wherever she wanted. Everything Helen had warned me about was coming true. Next Thursday works perfect, Linda continued. I will make sure he is here. He will not even know what the visit is about until it is too late. She laughed at something the doctor said, a cold laugh that made my skin crawl. Do not worry. By this same date next month, we will have everything arranged. I waited for her to leave the kitchen before opening my eyes. My hands trembled, but my mind was clear. I needed to call Paul immediately, but Paul called me first. Robert, something extraordinary just happened, he said with a note of astonishment. I had never heard from him. Do you know a Dr. Warren? A local doctor. Linda just scheduled an appointment with him. I answered. I heard everything on the camera. She is trying to get him to document that I have cognitive deterioration. I know. He called me 20 minutes ago. I almost dropped the phone. He called you? Yes. Dr. Warren was Helen's personal doctor for 15 years. Robert, he recognized Linda's name immediately. Paul paused for me to understand. 3 years ago, Helen visited him privately. She told him her daughter-in-law might one day try to declare you incompetent by fraudulent means, and asked him to contact me if anyone requested false documentation on your mental state. She was very specific with the details. I slumped against the back of the sofa, overwhelmed. Helen's protection reached even the doctors. Linda had tried to corrupt someone, and my wife had foreseen exactly that scenario. She had prepared safeguards years before that I was barely discovering. What did Dr. Warren tell Linda? I asked. He played along, accepted the appointment, took note of her offer of money, but he has no intention of delivering false documentation. In fact, he already agreed to testify about her bribery attempt if this reaches court. Paul's tone became practical. But we cannot depend only on his word. We need independent documentation of your capacity before Linda presents any request. I already scheduled an appointment for tomorrow morning. Dr. Michelle Torres practiced in a small but very well-equipped office near the university hospital. She was younger than I expected, a little over 40, with a kind gaze and a direct attitude that reminded me of Helen. Her credentials on the wall were impeccable. Certification in geriatric psychiatry, specializations in prestigious institutions, years of experience, and exactly the type of evaluation I was about to face. The exam lasted 90 minutes. She tested my short and long-term memory, working memory. The tasks were complex. She evaluated my reasoning capacity, my judgment, my ability to understand and handle financial matters. She asked me to draw clocks, remember word lists, solve logic puzzles, explain complex concepts. She interrogated me about my daily routines, my decision processes, and my understanding of my own situation. At the end, I was exhausted but sure of having answered clearly and completed every test without difficulty. Whatever Linda said about supposed deterioration, the evidence said otherwise. Dr. Torres took off her glasses, put down the clipboard, and looked at me with something that seemed like admiration. Mr. Miller, you are more lucid than many people half your age. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is intact, and your judgment is solid. There is absolutely no indication of cognitive deterioration. She smiled slightly. If anything, you are functioning at a higher level than many professionals I have evaluated. I will deliver a notarized report you can use in any legal proceeding. No court in the country would declare you incompetent based on my evaluation. Paul filed the ruling that same afternoon and registered it as preventive record at the county courthouse, which meant if Linda tried to request guardianship alleging cognitive deterioration, my documented competence would already be in the file, and her fraudulent maneuver would collapse before starting. But Paul did not stop there. He also reported Dr. Reynolds' initial willingness to participate in fraud to the state medical board, providing documentation of Linda's bribery attempt. Even if they didn't act immediately, the report would remain in official records. Another piece within the pattern of criminal conduct we were documenting. We closed her main avenue of attack, Paul said when he called that night, to confirm everything was ready. She cannot declare you incompetent. She cannot forge documents without being detected, and she cannot corrupt doctors who are already warned. But we still need one more thing to activate the trust's protection clause. We need her to make a direct threat and have it recorded. Something verbal, undeniable. Can you provoke it? I thought of Linda's arrogance, of her certainty she had already won, of how people like her break down when challenged for control, and their carefully assembled plans start to crumble. It was enough to press the right buttons, and she would say what she shouldn't. I knew exactly which ones to push. I can do it, I answered. She is organizing a family gathering this weekend. I will make sure she feels cornered. Be careful, Robert, Paul warned. Desperate people do desperate things. I know, but I am no longer the one who should be afraid. Linda thought she was hunting a confused old man. She had no idea she was walking into a trap, prepared for 3 years, and the trigger was about to be pulled. I called the family meeting for Saturday afternoon. I presented it as an opportunity to adjust our living arrangement and find a middle ground. The Sanders accepted immediately without hiding their satisfaction, convinced I was finally ready to surrender, that weeks of pressure had worn down an old man's resistance until leaving him without options. They gathered in the dining room with the anxious energy of scavengers around weakened prey. Victor arrived first and took over the chair at the end of the table as if marking territory. Martha followed with a leather folder under her arm and the smug assurance of someone holding the winning cards. Sarah sat next to her mother, already scrolling through her phone with practiced disinterest. Linda placed herself to Victor's right, like a general ready to accept surrender, and David, my son, stayed in the threshold with an impenetrable face and loyalties still uncertain. I took my place at the head, Helen's chair, where for 35 years she presided over family dinners, parties, and ordinary Tuesdays. The Sanders had tried to appropriate that spot since they arrived, and I refused to yield it. Now I settled into its known embrace and felt Helen's presence wrap around me like armor. Thank you for coming, I began with a soft voice. I know these weeks have been difficult. I thought we should talk about how to move forward. Linda smiled, but her eyes remained cold. We are very glad you are ready for this conversation, Robert. We have been worried about you. She nodded to her mother, who opened the folder and started spreading documents on the table. These are just some papers to facilitate things, Martha explained with a condescending tone. A power of attorney so Linda can help you manage your finances, a property transfer agreement to ensure the house stays in the family, and an authorization for care decisions in case you need medical attention and cannot express yourself. I observed the documents without touching them. Each one was a chain designed to bind me, a bolt to lock me in my own house. The power of attorney would give Linda control of my accounts. The transfer would snatch the house Helen and I built together, and the authorization would allow them to commit me when convenient for them. These are serious documents, I said carefully. I would need time to review them with my lawyer. Victor leaned forward with false concern. Robert, we are family. You do not need outside lawyers complicating everything. Just sign where Martha marked, and we handle the rest. There are excellent residences around here, Sarah added without looking up from her phone. Mom and I saw one last week. Very clean. They have bingo nights. Martha left a pen next to my hand. It is time to face reality, Robert. You are no longer young. You shouldn't be alone in this big house. We are offering help, taking that weight off you. Don't be stubborn. I pushed the pen away gently. I appreciate your concern, but today I am not signing anything. The room temperature dropped. Linda's smile disappeared, giving way to something harder and dangerous. She leaned toward me with perfectly manicured nails pressing the table. "You do not understand your situation, Robert," she said with a false sweetness, sharp as broken glass. "We are trying to help you. We have reorganized our lives to be here for you. But if you do not cooperate, we will have to take measures." She paused, letting the threat hang in the air. The words remained suspended. There are legal avenues to handle people who can no longer make good decisions for themselves. Courts that can appoint guardians. Doctors who evaluate capacity. We do not want to reach that. But you are leaving us no alternative. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch and her phrases bounce between us. In my pocket, the phone recorded every syllable. Victor cleared his throat, uncomfortable with how explicit his daughter had been. Martha put the documents back in the folder with a sour gesture. Sarah finally looked up from the cell phone, perceiving something had changed. And David. David stood paralyzed in the doorframe, pale, looking at his wife as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "We will give you a few days to think about it," Linda said, forcing composure again. "But do not delay, Robert. Our patience has limits." The meeting dissolved into a clumsy retreat. The Sanders moved to the living room with their assurance shaken but not broken. I saw Linda take Martha aside by the window, heads together in an urgent whisper. They were reorganizing, adjusting strategy, preparing the next attack. Whatever it was, I knew it would come soon. David remained a second longer in the doorway, met my gaze. Something passed between us. It wasn't understanding or trust yet, but the start of recognition. Then Linda called him with a dry tone, and he turned to rejoin her. I had her threats recorded, but they were not precise enough for a judge. I needed her to cross a line of no return, and she would do it the next night, at her housewarming party, in front of witnesses. The invitations appeared 3 days later, printed on cream cardstock with gold letters. "Join us to celebrate the housewarming at the Miller residence." The nerve left me breathless. Linda was organizing a party to celebrate the occupation of a house that wasn't hers, inviting neighbors and friends to witness her conquest, while the true owner wandered like a ghost in his own life. I played my role to perfection when the guests arrived that Saturday night. I moved through the rooms with a confused and diminished air. I smiled vaguely when spoken to, repeated questions as if I hadn't heard. Let Linda guide me by the elbow like a patient requiring supervision. The act cost me dignity, but dignity is recovered. The continuous recording in my pocket was worth any temporary humiliation. The house filled with people I barely recognized. Some colleagues of Helen, friends from the Sanders Club, and a few neighbors who had known us for years. Martha transformed the living room with rented decorations and catering snacks, erasing Helen's careful details under a costly and fleeting layer. I saw strangers drinking wine in crystal glasses Helen had inherited from her mother, and I smiled. I waited. The moment arrived midway through the night, when Rose Herrera, who lived 3 houses down and had attended Helen's funeral, approached Linda by the fireplace with a glass of champagne. "Linda, I didn't know you owned this beautiful house," she said with sincere admiration. "I always thought it belonged to Robert and Helen." Linda's smile widened, warm and secure. "Well, not officially yet, but we are in process. My father-in-law is getting old, as you can see." She pointed to where I pretended to examine a bookshelf. "We are taking charge to help him manage things. These transitions take time, but soon everything will be resolved." Rose nodded with sympathy and patted her arm. "Good thing he's with you. So many seniors have no family to step up." I turned away to hide my expression. Linda had just made a false claim of ownership in front of a witness. It wasn't enough on its own, but another thread in the tapestry of evidence we were weaving. The night advanced and wine flowed generously. I knew patience would deliver something much more damaging. Towards 10 p.m., the party reduced to a core of Sanders' allies and some lingering neighbors. Linda had been drinking steadily, her self-control loosening, her voice rising with every glass. I positioned myself in the kitchen, pretending to tidy up. I knew she would come looking for me. Frustrated people always look for the source of their frustration. I only had to wait. She appeared 20 minutes later in the doorframe with her glass half empty, eyes bright with contained rage. The public mask slipped, letting the predator show under the polish. She looked back to ensure we were alone and approached, lowering her voice to a poisonous whisper. "Listen to me well, old man." I looked at her with the same confused expression of the whole night. My hand rested in my pocket, touching the phone, capturing every word. "You are going to sign those papers." She pointed at my chest without touching me. "I am done playing nice. I am done waiting for you to see reason. You have until the end of the month. Then we do it the hard way." "The hard way?" I asked with a trembling voice. "The hard way. We will declare you incompetent. Doctors, judges. It is all just paperwork when you know the right people." She leaned in closer. I could smell the wine on her breath. "We will put you in the worst nursing home we find. In a place where... to a place where they park old people in wheelchairs and forget about them. And then we will sell this house and everything inside. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every pathetic memory of your beloved Helen." She paused, and her lips curled into something that could have been a smile if there had been minimal warmth behind it. "This is your last warning, Robert. Sign the easy way, or sign when you are so drugged you don't know what you are signing. Either way, we will get what we want. The only doubt is how much you are going to suffer." I held her gaze for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I nodded slowly, as if defeated, and returned to the dishes in the sink. I heard her satisfied exhale, felt her presence leave the kitchen, and heard her heels clicking towards the living room, where her victory party continued. An hour later, I excused myself, saying I was exhausted. In my bedroom, with the door closed, I connected the phone to the laptop and sent the recording to Paul Harrison's encrypted server. The audio was crisp. Every threat, every ultimatum, every incriminating word preserved intact. Paul's answer arrived at midnight. "This is it, Robert. She made a direct threat of coercion to an elder with specific consequences, combined with the cameras, the forged documents, and the bribery attempt. Now we can activate the trust's protection clause. I am filing the motion Monday first thing. This ends now." I read the message 3 times, allowing myself a small smile. Helen's trap had just snapped shut. Linda thought she had launched an ultimatum and didn't realize she had just signed her own eviction notice. But the biggest surprise was still to come, and it would come from the person I expected least. The knock on the door sounded at 6 in the morning, 2 days after the party. I had been awake for hours reviewing evidence and planning the next moves of a game that finally entered its final phase. When I opened the bedroom door, David was in the hall. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, with red sunken eyes, shirt wrinkled as if picked up from the floor. But under the fatigue I saw something else. Determination, or perhaps that cutting clarity that appears when comfortable lies. "Break, Dad, we have to talk," he said barely in a whisper, alone. I dressed quickly and followed him to his car. We drove in silence under the gray morning light through familiar streets to the next town where no one would recognize us. He stopped in the parking lot of a roadside diner, the kind that serves strong coffee to truckers and asks no questions. We sat at a table in the back, far from the few early customers. David ordered coffee, and when the waitress left, he took a manila folder from his jacket and put it between us. It was full of papers, photographs, the accumulated weight of secrets dragged finally to light. "I have been watching her," he said quietly, "since 3 weeks ago, since I found that check. I have documented everything." He opened the folder and started spreading the content on the plastic table. First the photos. Linda entering a hotel with a man I didn't recognize. The same man appearing in several images, dates and places. Different credit card statements, marked in yellow with expenses she never mentioned and destinations she claimed to have gone alone. Prints of messages between Linda and her mother with casual cruelty, fixed in black and white. "Look at this one," David said, pointing to an exchange dated 3 weeks ago. Martha had written, How is the transition going? Linda's answer, slow. The old man is more stubborn than we expected. But when the incapacity request goes through, it won't matter what he wants. We will control everything. Martha's reply included a smiley emoji and 3 words, just like Grandma. I stared at the messages, seeing the conspiracy unfold in their own careless words. They never imagined someone would read those exchanges. Never dreamed David would stop trusting his wife long enough to seek proof of her betrayal. But the worst was still to come. David's hands shook harder when he took the last item from the folder. A photograph of a positive pregnancy test still in its plastic wrapper, photographed on the bathroom marble. The date stamp indicated it was taken 3 days ago, but the test was dated 3 months back. I found this hidden in her drawer, he said with a broken voice, behind the jewelry box, wrapped in a handkerchief as if hiding a treasure. He looked up, and I saw the devastating truth written in his eyes before he pronounced the words. The baby isn't mine, Dad. We haven't been together in months. I did the math over and over. It's impossible. The confession broke him. Tears ran down his cheeks, and his body shook with contained sobs. For days, perhaps years, I watched my son crumble at a diner table, destroyed by the woman he trusted with his life, and I felt my own heart breaking with him. She has been using me our whole marriage, he said, choked up, using me to get to this family, to the house, to the money, to everything Mom built. He covered his eyes with his hands, trying to stop the crying. Mom tried to warn me years ago. She didn't say anything explicit, but she tried to show me how Linda treated her, those small cruelties she thought no one noticed. And I didn't listen. I defended Linda. I chose her over my own mother. He looked at me with anguish beyond words. I'm so sorry, Dad, for everything, for being blind, for being weak, for leaving you alone when you needed me most. I leaned in and took his hand, my son's hand, rough from work and trembling from pain, but reaching back for me for the first time in years. Your mother never stopped loving you, I said softly. Not for a single moment. She knew Linda manipulated you. She saw what was happening. But she also knew if she pushed too hard, she would lose you completely. So she protected you as she could, preparing for the day when you yourself saw the truth. David cried freely now, but something in his expression was changing. The pain was still there, but next to it grew something harder, firmer, determination. She left proof. I continued. Hidden cameras, private investigators, modified trusts. She raised a fortress around everything ours and trusted that one day you would help me defend it. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and straightened in the seat. The broken man who had sat down in front of me started to recompose. David was rebuilding himself before my eyes, brick by brick, breath by breath, and then he said, "Let's finish what Mom started, together." And for a long moment we stayed there sitting, father and son, with decades of distance crumbling between heartbeats. The wall Linda had raised between us with years of manipulation and isolation had come down at last. Whatever happened next, we would face it as a family. My son had come home. Together we already had enough evidence to end this war. But when the sheriff arrived at our door, not even I was prepared for how complete the fall of Linda's world would be. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a well-designed structure, finally bearing its load. I had barely finished my first cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Its chime cut the silence of the house like a starting shot, and through the window there were 2 sheriff's deputies on the porch next to Paul Harrison, with that severe expression of someone about to deliver the final blow. Linda got to the door before me, with her silk robe poorly adjusted and hair messy from sleep. She opened it with the irritated confidence of someone expecting good news at the worst moment. Perhaps she thought they were coming to back her incapacity complaint, to take the confused old man for an evaluation. Her smile was already forming when Paul took a step forward and handed her a sheaf of official documents. Mrs. Sanders Miller, I am notifying you of an emergency protection order signed this morning by the county judge. he said with a calm, professional voice, without a trace of pity. You and your family must vacate this property within 7 days. And furthermore, you are subject to a restraining order prohibiting you from approaching within 500 feet of Mr. Robert Miller, while the hearing for charges of elder abuse is held. For an instant, Linda stood staring at the papers as if written in an unknown language. Then the words penetrated, and I saw her carefully built reality start to break like glass against concrete. "This is impossible," she whispered. "There is a mistake." Chaos erupted behind her before she could finish. Martha appeared in the hall, saw the deputies, and started screaming that it was all a misunderstanding, that they had to speak to someone in charge, that her family had contacts who would fix this immediately. Victor pushed his wife with his face purple with fury, threatening to sue the sheriff's department, the judge, Paul Harrison, and anyone who crossed him. Sarah broke into tears on the stairs with her phone already glued to her ear, calling someone. Perhaps a lawyer or friend who could reverse the tide, taking away her plans. The deputies remained serene during the storm. The older one, a gray-haired man with the patience of someone who has seen worse, explained that failing to comply with the order would imply immediate arrest, and suggested starting to pack and look for alternative lodging. His partner handed Martha a copy of the order and stepped back with professional distance. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, already dressed, with a face of stone. Linda turned to him with desperate eyes. "David, tell them this is madness. Tell them your father lost his mind. We have to fight this together." My son held her gaze without wavering. "No," he said quietly, "we don't have to." Something crossed Linda's face. Perhaps the recognition that her last ally had abandoned her. Desperation turned to rage, and she turned to me with eyes in flames. "You are going to regret this," she hissed. "I am going to destroy you in court. I will tell everyone what kind of senile and vindictive old man you are. I will make the whole town know how you turned your own son against his wife. This doesn't end here, Robert. This is just starting." I held her gaze, feeling the calm that arrives when years of patient preparation finally bear fruit. "Linda, I want you to understand something," I said. "Every word you have said in this house during the last month has been recorded. Every threat, every plan, every lie." I paused to let it weigh. My wife made sure of it. The color left her face so fast I thought she would faint. She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. For the first time since I met her, Linda Sanders Miller had nothing to say. She looked at the antique kitchen clock, the smoke detector in the hall, every innocent object that could have hidden a watchful eye. And I saw comprehension dawn on her expression. She had been caught completely, totally, and irreversibly. The next 2 hours passed in a whirlwind of frantic packing and contained hysteria. The Sanders stuffed belongings into suitcases and trash bags, their prior arrogance replaced by desperate efficiency. The deputies supervised from the doorways, ensuring property wasn't damaged, nor limits crossed beyond angry words. Martha stopped once to look at me with pure hate, but said nothing. Even she understood that silence was now her only defense. David and I retired to the kitchen far from the chaos. He filled the coffee maker while I took out the cups Helen reserved for special occasions. Delicate porcelain with painted flowers that hadn't seen light since her funeral. We stood together at the counter, father and son sharing our first domestic moment in years, and the simple act of making coffee felt like a ritual of reconstruction. It was a silent recovery, a clear declaration that this remained our home. From the window I saw boxes piling up in the driveway, while the Sanders loaded the rented SUV with the remains of their failed conquest, faces tense with pure humiliation. Linda came out last with a designer bag and what little remained of her shattered dignity. She looked at the house once, looked at me in the window, and in her eyes I saw a promise of revenge. But for the first time since Helen's death, I felt something other than pain or fear. I felt hope. The Sanders were leaving. But Linda wasn't done fighting. She hired a lawyer and filed a countersuit, a desperate gamble to take everything to a public trial. Exactly what we were waiting for. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old paper, the accumulated weight of countless sentences dictated within those walls. 3 weeks had passed since the eviction, 3 weeks in which Linda regrouped, hired a very expensive lawyer from the capital, and launched her counterattack. She sued me for wrongful eviction and intentional emotional distress, alleging I had manufactured evidence and manipulated my own supposedly deteriorated mind to destroy an innocent woman's reputation. A bold strategy born of desperation and financed with what little her family had left. And also a catastrophic mistake. The room was full of curious onlookers, attracted by rumors about the Miller family war. I recognized neighbors, Helen's old colleagues, even the woman from the supermarket who always asked about my health. They had come to see the show, to check if the quiet widower of Maple Street was really the vindictive monster Linda's filings described. I sat at the defense table next to my lawyer, Daniel Harrison, Paul's son who took the lead in court, with hands clasped and serene face, hiding the anticipation boiling inside. Linda was on the other side, flanked by her parents and a silver-haired lawyer, whose hourly rate surely exceeded my monthly pension. She wore a modest blue dress chosen to project innocence, discreet makeup and a posture carefully calculated to seem vulnerable. She didn't look at me once. Her lawyer opened with a passionate speech about family devotion corrupted by senile paranoia. He painted Linda as a loving daughter-in-law who sacrificed everything to care for an aging patriarch, only to be betrayed by a confused old man, manipulated by external forces. He mentioned my age over and over, insinuated cognitive deterioration without saying it directly, and suggested evidence against his client had been manufactured by persons with hidden agendas. Then Daniel Harrison stood up and the atmosphere changed. He presented our evidence methodically, each piece leaning on the previous, like elements of a bridge designed to bear impossible weight. First came the videos from the hidden camera. 3 years of recordings showing Linda's cruelty, her contempt and calculated manipulation. The room watched in silence as she humiliated Helen during her illness, as Martha Sanders outlined the strategy to keep the house, and as Sarah laughed about parking old people in wheelchairs. Linda's lawyer objected over and over, but the judge allowed the material, his expression becoming more severe with each clip. Then followed the audios, the threats at the housewarming party, demands in family meetings, casual conversations about forged documents and bribed doctors, and Linda's own voice echoed without excuses, saying, "We are going to declare you incompetent. We are going to put you in the worst nursing home we find. And then we are going to sell this house and everything inside." Words naked and damning. Experts testified about the fake documents. A graphologist showed differences between my authentic signature and Linda's forgeries. A forensic accountant traced the $15,000 check Helen had discovered years ago and proved it was deposited without authorization into an account controlled by Linda. And Dr. Reynolds testified about the bribery attempt to issue false reports on my supposed deterioration. His testimony was devastating. Finally, Daniel presented my certified evaluation of competence from Dr. Torres, making clear my mind was lucid, my judgment intact, and my decisions solely mine. And the story of the manipulated old man collapsed under the weight of documented truth. Absolute silence arrived when Daniel called an unexpected witness. "Your Honor, the defense calls Grace Miller." A murmur ran through the room as Grace rose and walked firmly to the stand. She wore a simple gray dress, silver hair tied back, and a serenity worthy of someone who had waited a long time for that moment. Linda's lawyer protested the surprise witness, but the judge rejected it, interested in listening. Daniel approached with measured step and asked Mrs. Miller, "Could you tell the court What was your relationship with the deceased Helen Miller? Grace took a deep breath, looked at me for an instant, and said, "She was my sister, my younger sister. We were born Grace and Helen Patterson before marrying and taking different last names." The room exploded. Linda's lawyers stood up demanding explanations and inventing objections. The judge banged the gavel, asking for order, but it was too late. Everyone understood Helen's protection had been deeper and more meticulous than Linda ever imagined. The scope of her husband's manipulation was much greater than anyone had imagined. Grace continued with her testimony over the room's murmur. "Helen asked me to protect her husband if anything ever happened to her. I have been documenting Mrs. Sanders Miller's conduct since my sister's funeral. Photographs, recordings, incident logs, everything I witnessed from my adjacent house." She presented her proofs, confirming what Paul had already established, and adding new details that drew an even more damning picture. By the time she stepped down from the stand, Linda's case was reduced to rubble. The judge's ruling was swift and forceful. He dismissed Linda's lawsuit with prejudice, ensuring she could never file the same claims again. He declared her responsible for elder abuse, fraud, and forgery, ordering restitution and legal costs totaling over $200,000. He dictated a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with me or my property. In his final statement, he referred proofs of forgery to the prosecutor's office for possible criminal indictment. Linda remained motionless while the sentence was read, her face turned into a mask of disbelief. When the bailiff approached to escort her out of the room, Martha Sanders let out a sob that bounced off the high ceilings. Victor stared ahead with arrogance finally broken. They took his daughter, and she didn't look back, not at the judge, not at the public, not at David sitting on his father's side with tears running down his face. I should have felt victorious, vindicated. But when observers retired and the room emptied, I felt a strange hollow. The battle was won, but the cost had been measured in years of suffering I never knew Helen had endured alone to protect me. Then Paul touched my arm and handed me a red envelope. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. "Helen left this too." The red envelope weighed more than it should. It was sealed with burgundy wax and an antique detail so typical of Helen. She always liked rituals from another era, small ceremonies elevating the everyday. I passed my thumb over the seal, feeling the mark of what looked like a pressed flower, and wondered how long that envelope had waited in Paul's safe for this exact moment. "She gave me very precise instructions," Paul said in a low voice. We were still in the courtroom, although no one was left. Afternoon light entered diagonally through high windows, casting long shadows on empty benches. This was only to be opened when the legal matter was completely resolved. She was very clear with the timing. He paused, and his professional composure softened. "I have kept it. Almost 4 years, Robert. She made me promise." Helen prepared this final message when she was still healthy, when cancer was nothing more than cells waiting to betray. She already knew then that one day I would need not just protection, but a path forward. My hands trembled, breaking the seal. The wax snapped with a soft sound that seemed to resonate in the empty room, releasing secrets kept too long. Inside, I found another letter with Helen's elegant handwriting, and underneath a small sheaf of documents, tied with a faded ribbon. A set of keys fell into my palm, cold and unfamiliar. I unfolded the letter and began to read, and with every word the room faded until only Helen's voice existed, speaking straight to my heart. "My dear Robert," she wrote, "if you are reading this, then the battle is over, and you won. I always knew you would. You just needed the right tools at the right moment. I am so proud of you, of the man you have always been. Even when you couldn't see your own strength, I had to stop, press my hand against my eyes and breathe, the grief rising fresh and sharp." Paul remained close in silence, giving me space. Understanding there are moments requiring witnesses but not intrusion, now is time to stop fighting and start living. The letter continued, "You have spent too much time defending what we built. It is time to build something new. Remember our dream, the cabin by the lake, where we said we would grow old together, where we would watch sunsets from the porch and listen to loons call over the water. I never forgot that dream and never stopped planning it." I turned to the documents under the letter, fingers clumsy, untying the ribbon. Property records, a deed, a trust dated 5 years ago establishing ownership of land on Lake Champlain, the same lake where Helen and I spent our honeymoon, to which we returned on anniversaries and stolen getaways during the marriage, where we always said we would retire when the time came. The cabin was real. Helen had bought it in secret with her own inheritance, money I thought intact for emergencies. She bought our dream when she was still healthy, when there was still time to imagine a future, knowing in some corner of her heart she might not live to see it. She left me a destination for the years I could not share. I returned to the letter, reading through tears now falling unchecked. "The cabin has been waiting for you, my love. I furnished it myself. During those weekends I told you I was visiting old friends. Forgive the small deception. I wanted it to be perfect. There is a garden behind the kitchen where you can plant what you want. There is a dock for fishing in the mornings. There's a swing on the porch facing west, placed exactly to watch the sunset." She had thought of everything, even in those last months when her body failed and time ran out. She had prepared not just my defense, but my liberation. "Sell the house on Maple Street," she wrote. "It holds too much pain now, too many memories shadowed by what happened at the end. Go to our lake, Robert. Plant new flowers. Create new memories. Let the water wash away grief and rage. And remember, we had 35 beautiful years together. That is what matters. That is what remains." Her ending words blurred as I read them, but I forced myself to distinguish every letter, every curve of her handwriting, known as well as my own, and to understand, wherever you are, I walk beside you, in every sunset, in every morning, in every quiet moment when you think you are alone. There I am, my love. I never left, and I never will. I love you eternally. Your Helen. For a long time I could not speak. I remained sitting in the empty courtroom, holding the keys to a future my wife had built for me, understanding finally the true dimension of her love. She had protected me from predators, armed me for battle, guided me to victory. When it all ended, she left me a place to heal. Paul's hand rested an instant on my shoulder, and he said quietly, "She was an extraordinary woman." I nodded, unable to form words, clinging to the keys like sacred objects. Helen had prepared it all, my protection, my triumph, and my future. And now only one thing remained to do: say goodbye to the past and advance toward the new life she had left me. 3 months later, the for sale sign appeared in the yard of the house where Helen and I had built our life. I stood at the window watching the real estate agent hammer the post into the earth, each blow confirming that chapter was closing at last. The walls held 35 years of memories, first steps, birthdays, quiet nights, whispered conversations in the dark, but also shadows poisoned by what occurred. Helen had been luminous as always, and it was time to let go. The sign brought Linda back one last time. I saw her car stop on a gray Tuesday afternoon. I watched her stay several minutes at the wheel before getting out. She looked different, smaller than the woman who entered my house with such arrogant security. Brand clothes replaced by something simple, makeup almost non-existent, posture without a trace of that pride. She advanced slowly up the path and stopped on the porch steps where Helen tended her pots. I faced her in the door of a house that would soon belong to strangers, and she said, "I came to apologize," although in her eyes remained that calculating glint I learned to recognize. "Maybe we can fix something, for David's sake. He shouldn't lose his childhood home for errors I committed." I observed her in silence. This woman who tried to steal everything I loved, who conspired and lied with rehearsed ease. Perhaps she believed her own acting. Perhaps she thought a last maneuver would save something from the disaster. But I was no longer the confused old man she wanted to bury. This house was Helen's heart, I said calmly. Every room, every corner, every inch held her love. You disrespected that love from the first day you crossed the door. You disrespected her while she died, and tried to destroy what she left. I shook my head slowly and added that no one who treated her like that could stay, neither in the house, nor in memory, nor in my forgiveness. Her mask fell for a second, showing the rage she carried inside, but she no longer had weapons, nor advantages, nor plans that hadn't been discarded. Goodbye, Linda. I took a step back and closed the door. Through the window I saw her stay motionless, almost a minute before turning around and leaving. She didn't look back, and I never saw her again. The consequences of her decisions chained together in the following months. The prosecutor filed charges for forgery, and Linda accepted a deal. 2 years probation and a permanent criminal record. The affair came to light during the divorce diffused in local gossip networks, and destroying what little remained of her reputation. Even her own parents took distance when her participation was exposed. Martha faced her own investigation for what they had done years ago with her mother's inheritance, and the pattern of abuse finally caught up to a family that had made it a habit. The last news was Linda moved to the other side of the country to start from zero in a city where no one knew her name, carrying only the ruins of her ambition. David filed for divorce the week following the trial, and Linda, facing charges and growing legal fees, contested nothing. Not the settlement, not the conditions, not even the revelation of the pregnancy that wasn't his. The marriage dissolved fast like frost at dawn, leaving my son free for the first time in years. He helped me pack up the house, spending entire weekends wrapping Helen's things with paper and care-preserving objects of a well-lived life. We worked together for days among boxes and memories. We started to talk for real. He shared stories of his mother I didn't know. And I told him of the early years of our marriage, of struggles and achievements that formed us, and wounds that had festered for so long began to close. On our last day in the house, David stopped in the empty living room and looked at me with doubt. Dad, when you settle in the cabin, would it be okay if I visit sometimes? I didn't hesitate. It is your home too, son. It always was. That is family. The cabin by Lake Champlain was everything Helen had promised, and more. She chose it to perfection. A modest construction of weathered wood with a wraparound porch, looking toward the water, westward towards the water. The garden behind the kitchen awaited spring planting. The dock extended over soft waves, kissing the shore with a calm rhythm, and the porch swing faced the sunset, placed exactly as she had described. Grace, Aunt Grace, as I learned to call her, moved to a cabin a little down the road and came almost every afternoon with tea, company, and stories of Helen's childhood I treasured like jewels. That particular afternoon we sat together watching the sun descend toward the mountains on the other side of the lake. The sky burned in oranges and pinks, reflecting on the water in changing patterns. David's car was visible on the winding road below, coming to spend the weekend, and I managed to distinguish another figure in the passenger seat, perhaps a new beginning for him. On the table between Grace and me, Helen's photograph caught the golden light, and she smiled at me from other years, frozen in a joy I remember as if it were yesterday. I raised my teacup in a silent toast and whispered, "We made it, love." Finally, we made it. The lake opened before me, serene and infinite, and for the first time in years I felt Helen's hand in mine again. Not from grief, but from gratitude. She gave me protection, victory, and future. But her greatest gift was reminding me that love does not end with death. It only finds new ways to hold on. Each story leaves its mark, and this one about the silent strength of a husband, the extraordinary love of a wife, and a family's path from betrayal to redemption. reminds us that those who truly love us never stop protecting us, even when they are no longer here to hold our hand. Helen saw the storm coming years before it arrived, and built an ark strong enough to carry her husband to safety. That is real love, not grandiloquent gestures nor passionate declarations, but silent sacrifices and protections prepared in secret, with the hope of never needing them. For many of us, family is not blood. It is the decisions we make, the people we choose to accompany, and the limits we set to care for what matters most. Robert's story invites us to look at our own lives, our families and vulnerabilities. Were you ever underestimated because of your age? Did you have to protect yourself from those who should have loved you? Did you discover someone fought for you all along without you knowing? We want to read you. Share your experience in the comments. Perhaps your story helps someone else find the courage to stand firm. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of family justice and the silent power of those who refuse to be broken. And remember, sometimes the greatest strength isn't answering with blows, but knowing exactly when and how to let the truth speak for itself.